Good afternoon. And with respect to our senior colleagues in the media, Raul Herrera from El Hispanic, Mark Sanchez from Coin TV Channel 6, and Roberto Olmos from the Oregonian. I come today to make a presentation on Hispanics in the media. My presentation is based not only on statistics, but on awareness of what is reality in the media in the Portland Tri-County area. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. El límite de mi lenguaje es el límite de mi mundo. A very true statement. As we entered the latter half of the 80s, the decade of the Hispanic, we might enlarge that quote to include also images for this. 1985 is in many ways the electronic image age. The language of video prevails. However, we as Hispanics are portrayed, whether it be in print or visual image. The impact is still felt heavily by the Hispanic community. We are, to others who do not yet know us, as we are depicted in the mass media, the image they see of Hispanics, regardless of whether it matches the reality of our experience, is how we will be known and remembered. I would like to share with you today a close look at Hispanics in the media. I believe that it is a medium through which all facets of Hispanic life, our politics, our education, our health care, our creative expressions in the form of arts, is filtered. Let's go back for a moment to the beginning of the 80s decade. We were already then a growing minority in the United States, representing every Spanish-speaking country. It was predicted by the year 2000 we would be the largest minority in the United States. As the largest minority in the country, Hispanics would represent an impressive buying power. And their impact on the mainstream American culture, whether good or bad, remained for history and the media to reflect. In 1980, Hispanics in the media comprised less than 1% nationwide. What were the dreams and aspirations shared by Hispanics in the media at the beginning of this decade? And what is the reality that those goals and objectives translated into? The decade of the 80s began with a promise. This was to be the decade of the Hispanic. Billboards sprang up with Hispanic faces saying, "Otra fría, otro Coors." This slogan persisted everywhere, in magazines, on television, in spite of the fact that many Hispanic organizations boycotted the Coors Company for alleged unfair hiring practices towards women and minorities. Still, the mass media image prevailed. Television commercials also depicted Hispanics in family settings by buying name-brand products. Hispanics were progressing beyond the stereotypical frito bandido image, or were they? With a wave of national advertisers realizing the market value of Hispanics, the exploitation of the Hispanic community still occurred under the guise of good business. For instance, Spanish International Network told potential advertisers, Latins are brand buyers because for many advertised brands represent a status symbol. Still, not all attention focused to the growing Hispanic community was selfish or negative. In 1980, Latino television programming received a boost from the U.S. Office of Education in the form of $6.4 million for the production of programs that were to improve interracial and interethnic understanding. Latinos particularly feel a lack of programs that bear direct relation to their experience in the U.S. or portray our gente realistically. Hispanics across the nation were making their presence as consumers felt, as they should be. In 1982, Hispanic journalists made a historic move by organizing a pioneer national media conference for Hispanic journalists, and also the first national conference on Spanish language media. The Spanish language media conference was coordinated by Cecilia Eviar, the then producer of Two on the Town, a primetime program on CBS television in Los Angeles. It's an affiliate. And by Rafael Prieto, a reporter with the LA Spanish language daily La Opinión. The Hispanic Media Conference has as the chairperson of its steering committee, Frank Del Ormo, an editorial writer for the LA Times, and the committee itself was comprised of nearly 24 print and electronic media journalists working from coast to coast. Both conferences were held in Southern California, UCLA and San Diego. At this time, although Hispanics comprised 8% of the total population, only 1.3% of the mass media professionals were Hispanic. These two groups of Hispanic professionals in the media set two serious objectives: a series of skills workshops and another series of strategy workshops. The skills workshops covered sessions on freelancing, satellite communications, management training, cable television, establishing and financing, alternative community media marketing, alternative media careers, and Spanish language media issues. The strategy workshop was just as vital to the success of Hispanics in the media, for it covered networking, funding and organizing Hispanic media groups, journalism, education, labor unions, and affirmative action, and included evaluating the existing media coverage in individual communities along with the ethics used in covering Hispanic communities, and the Hispanic minority in the newsroom dealing with Hispanic issues. One of the facts which has spurred the creation of these two landmark conferences in Hispanic media was 20% of the editors who responded in 1981. American Society of Newspaper Editors surveyed by saying flat out that hiring minorities would lower the standard of their newspapers. 50% of the editors also added that minority applicants were less qualified than their white job-searching competitors. In 1982, nearly 2/3 of the country's daily newspapers employed no minority journalist at all. The principal goal then of these two conferences was twofold: to improve the professional skills of participants and to organize Hispanic journalism and communication professionals into networks with national impact. Things were beginning to happen in the field of electronic media also. Hispanics were no longer quiet about the despairing image of themselves they saw on television or about the employment figures in the field of telecommunications. LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens, filed a class action complaint in 1982, charging systematic employment discrimination against Latinos by the nation's top television networks, motion picture companies, and advertising agencies. This complaint, filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, charged that Hispanics, off and on screen, comprised only 1% of the employees hired by the 10 major companies. There were also a complaint about the image of Hispanics being portrayed by the electronic media. Of that 1% of characters portrayed, that is 37 of 3,546. Only 11 of those Hispanics had speaking roles, and 7 of those 11 were portrayed as criminals. A 1971, LULAC argued that the exclusionary hiring practice hurt not only Hispanics but non-Hispanics as well. The exclusion precludes television viewers from learning anything about the needs, viewpoints, and desires of 20 million Hispanics. There's an economic theory called opportunity cost. For every opportunity there is a cost, for every cost there is an opportunity. The cost is what we bear. The opportunities to reach into our wealth is what they lose. Perhaps that, more than any one single factor, became the entryway into successful Hispanic media projects. A large growing minority represents American dollars and big business possibility. Who is going to cash in by reaching the waiting Hispanic consumer market? One answer, perhaps the most successful, was the Hispanic press. They stretch from Atlanta, Georgia, Hartford, Connecticut, to Boise, Idaho, to Portland, Oregon. Newspapers by, for, and about Hispanics in the United States. Some are a little more than a glorified newsletter. Others have the sophistication of LA's La Opinión, which currently employs 180 staff and has a circulation of over 55,000. Advertisers quickly realized that the Hispanic buying market was the most effectively reached through the Hispanic publication, whether it be bilingual, only Spanish, a daily, weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. The latest study of 1984 shows that there are now approximately 500 newspapers aimed at Hispanics in the United States. Professor Fernandez, a professor in journalism at Columbia College in Chicago, called this blossoming of the Hispanic press a phenomena of growth. The Hispanic press represents a window of opportunity with a growing potential audience and advertisers who are awakening to the Hispanic consumer market. The growth of these numerous Hispanic publications can be directly attributed to two important factors. One is the lack of attention to Hispanic concerns by the mainstream media, and two is the growing realization by big advertisers that the key to the Hispanic market is not to be found in the pages of Anglo publications. It is a response to the growth of the Hispanic population, to the reality that the Anglo media doesn't respond to the needs of Hispanics. And of course, national advertisers are realizing that Hispanics tend to read and listen to their own media, not the Anglo media. They now recognize the importance and penetration of this Hispanic media, so they are putting money into it. Another important factor in the success of the Hispanic press is the growing affluence of the Hispanic community, which besides appealing to major national advertisers has also made it feasible for the community to support its own publication. Although some national and international news items are generally featured in the Hispanic press, the main focus remains on each individual Hispanic community. Another factor in its growing success. The growing trend seems to be that in general, Hispanic media is good business. In 1984, another important step as Hispanic journalism was taken. The second National Hispanic Media Conference was held, this time in Washington, D.C., and more than 500 media professionals attended and formed the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. One of the conference's main focus issues was the portrayal of Hispanics in the media. The Hispanic media professionals at the conference faced a bleak reality. Hispanics compose 6% of the country's population officially. We all know what those numbers are about. Yet only 1.3%, 650 of 50,000 reporters and editors working in English language general circulation dailies in the continental U.S. are Hispanic. According to last year's survey by the American Society of Newspaper Editors, the figures had not altered by much. However, there have been some improvement in how these Hispanic journalists and media professionals were now regarded. For as the Hispanic population continued to grow both numerically and in political influence, news executives found themselves continually unable to report the Hispanic community properly when they lacked journalists on their staff who were even vaguely familiar with its language or some historical understanding of its Hispanic leaders, issues, and major needs. So the progress of Hispanic media professionals continue, like a bilingual cumbia, one step forward, one step back. Canto Media, a viable and highly successful media production company owned by a young Hispanic woman, Esmeralda Santiago, shooting quality material in Boston studios. They are already the winner of more than 30 national and international film awards, including being nominated on Grammy Night, competing with Michael Jackson's dazzling Pepsi commercial. Another example is T.G. W. Miles, a Los Angeles Chicano who runs an $11 million a year corporation, The Hollywood Reporter, as its publisher and editor-in-chief. Another successful example is El Norte, a film about a Guatemalan brother and sister migrating north to the United States. El Norte has received national acclaim and good reviews. A reviewer in Nuestra magazine writes, from a Latino point of view, it is not an exaggeration to say that El Norte is the best American film in recent memory because its Americanness included Latin America, the United States, and Latinos who live here. Variety called it the first American independent epic. Although the film was spoken of as a possible Oscar nominee, because 80% of the dialogue was in Spanish, it did not qualify for the main category, but since it was made by an American Hispanic, it also did not qualify for the foreign film category. Gregory Nava, the Chicano independent filmmaker who directed it, is caught then in the dilemma of the Hispanic in this country, caught between two cultures and two languages, neither a mango nor an apple. Still, the film's success helped Hispanics feel proud of their dignified portrayal, which no doubt accounted greatly for its popularity in both Hispanic and non-Hispanic circles. Not surprisingly then, A.K.A. Pablo, which was written by Norman Lear for the talented Chicano comedian Paul Rodriguez, was canceled for the opposite reason. Instead of portraying Hispanics in a new and positive light, the comedy show fell back on outdated and negative stereotypical image of Hispanics. One successful film, one failed television series, the key to both is the authenticity of the writers involved in the depiction of Hispanics in the media. Let's look closer to home, at the Portland area, and perhaps by utilizing these examples from the past in the Hispanic media and noting the current trend in our own Hispanic community, we can draw up some goals and means for a greater future for Oregon Hispanics in the media. Portland's Tri-County area is home for more than 24,000 of the state's census-stamped 65,847 Hispanics. In the state of Oregon, Hispanics are the largest minority already, and yet Hispanics in the media are greatly underrepresented. The Oregonian, Portland's newspaper, and the largest newspaper in the state, has 7 Hispanics employed out of 1,100 employees. 2 only of those Hispanics are reporters. The other 3 are women clerks and 2 crafts pressroom workers. The Oregonian has no Hispanic column as such. The radio stations, none of which has a full schedule of Hispanic programming, have 1 Hispanic media professional working for them. That's 1. The television stations, which also do not air programs aimed at the Hispanic population or cater to the needs in the Hispanic community on a regular, ongoing basis, employ a total of 6 Hispanic media professionals. This makes the total figure of working Hispanic media professionals in the mainstream media outlets in Portland's Tri-County area 9. 9 out of 24,000 is a small minority within a minority. But these are just figures, statistics. What about the Hispanic professionals involved? Let's zoom in for a closer look. A little bit of media talk there. What specific contribution do they offer to the Hispanic community? How have they survived the mainstream media experience? And finally, how can we generate more of this rare species, the Hispanic media professional? A picture of a strong personal drive quickly emerges. The Hispanic media professionals interviewed had nothing handed to them on a platter of ease. Their education in the mass media field was achieved through their own hard work and perseverance, not through any grant or special program for Hispanics. These few Hispanics media professionals strive to create transitions in how their stations view and cover Hispanics, legal issues, the INS issues, and evolving Hispanic political presence. With their knowledge not only of the Spanish language, but of the Hispanic culture, which they themselves have experienced, they use their skills in the field of telecommunications, print, and radio broadcasting to accurately and sensitively portray Hispanics in the media. Unfortunately, their magnificent effort is no guarantee of continued employment. There is a reverse trend operating in the hiring of Hispanic media professionals. Recently, Rogers Cable Systems had 1 such employed Hispanic media professional, but he has been laid off. Channel 2 also had a total of 3 Hispanic media professionals, and all but 1 have been laid off. Instead of any gains, there's a recent loss in numbers of employed Hispanic media professionals. There are now approximately 12 freelancing Hispanic media professionals in the Tri-County area. Scholarships and internships that cater specifically to Hispanics studying the media professions are non-existent in the Tri-County area at this time. An affirmative action counselor at Portland State University said there used to be until they were terminated by budget cuts 4 years ago. I think we're all familiar with that little scenario. There are also no federal or private grants that are earmarked for Hispanic students pursuing a career in the media. Another harsh reality in the lack of sponsored Hispanic programming either on the radio or in television in the area's many stations. There is a volunteer-supported smattering of programs varying in length from 1/2 hour to 2-hour specials with focus on issues of interest to the Hispanic community. Limited funding is provided through KBOO, KPBS, Rogers Cable Systems, and STORE at this time. However, all of these media projects are the direct effort of non-paid professionals and novices learning the media trade. So although this type of programming does meet some of the Hispanic community needs, volunteer-powered projects have the inherent problem of being compromised in the ability of volunteers to participate according to schedule, the acquiring of sufficient access to facilities and equipment, and to reaching and maintaining broadcast quality programs. However, the most serious flaw of all is the lack of transition from trained volunteer position to a responsible paid employment position as a Hispanic media professional. If funding, whether it be government or privately sponsored, were available in both radio and television programming for Hispanics, and these freelance volunteers could be in turn training for a position in the telecommunication field, having direct access not only to facility and equipment, but a waiting job. Not only would there be quality Hispanic programming, there would also most certainly be more than 9 employed Hispanic professionals in the media of the Tri-County area. We've all seen the age of grants come and go. Fund sources dry up and experienced ourselves the impact in our respective professions. I do not advocate dependency on such handouts. Research bears this truth out. Hispanic media is good business. Once off the ground, quality programming would not only cater to the Hispanic community needs, but would also appeal to the market of Hispanic consumers and become a self-paying business proposition. By not having direct access to the mass media structure, we are in effect wasting our resources of A, large and growing Hispanic buying power, B, a group of talented media professionals who already exist and who by far are the best qualified to experience maximum penetration of the Hispanic consumer market. We already have the Hispanic press present in the Tri-County area: El Informa, El Hispanic, El Grito. This is the avenue that should be explored and utilized to capacity for the advertisement and benefit of Hispanic businesses and other quality products. The television stations and the radio stations and all their equipment are already here in the Tri-County area, ready to be mobilized by waiting Hispanic media professionals. What then is the key to the Hispanic media success? Plans, goals, programs that can be organized and put into action, scholarships and internships for Hispanic youth wishing to pursue careers in the media should be set up and sponsored by the Oregonian and the various TV station and radio networks. The Oregonian should at least in the Sunday issue have an Hispanic column, bilingual, so that the entire community could be educated to Hispanic issues and concerns. Both radio and television could produce commercially viable radio programs targeted at the Hispanic community and could at the same time provide training and employment for Hispanics in all areas of broadcasting, mass media, journalism, and engineering. I have to stop at the engineering. The engineering is one thing you're seeing before you right now. Oftentimes we represent our success by what we see in front of the camera. The true success is what we see, it was what we do not see, but what we feel from what happens behind cameras. Remember, he who controls the tape controls the message. Unless we are an integral part of all phases of that tape, from scheduling to payroll to production to business decisions involving the media, we are at a major loss. The Tri-County area of Portland, Oregon could have its own success story about the Hispanic media. With over 700 professionals directly involved in the television broadcast into the Portland area market, and the Hispanic representation being what it is, we need entry-level jobs created, training programs geared to Hispanics in all facets of television, and access made available to the already existing freelancing Hispanic media professionals. In essence, all these steps would build a bridge that now doesn't exist to correct the fault, underrepresentation, which does exist. It's been done with cable television in Texas, with the Hispanic press in Florida, and in Los Angeles, and it can also happen here in the Portland Tri-County area. We have the numbers and we have the facilities. The Hispanic community can be a tremendous help by realizing and exercising its true right in the American marketplace by staying in the driver's seat as a consumer. No longer should the Hispanic community take a back seat in the media or in business, for it can make the marketplace recognize its true value without compromise by highlighting its positive aspects and being ever alert to recognize when issues are important for its survival. Hispanic media is good business, and what affects the buying power of the Hispanic community directly affects the entire community and its well-being. Each member of the Hispanic community can be educated through the media to know with conviction that even when programs or funds fail, they still have their most valuable asset, themselves. Thank you.